A future king, a grieving wife, and a broken brother all gathered in silence beside Prince Harry's hospital bed, whispering goodbye. It was just after 7 a.m. in Montecito when the first unconfirmed reports began to trickle out. A source close to the royal security detail mentioned an emergency medical call had been placed from the Sussex residence. It wasn't the first time rumors had swirled around Prince Harry's health, but this felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, an ominous weight that said, this wasn't just stress. It wasn't just a scare. Something serious had happened. Something irreversible. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Within hours, news outlets from Los Angeles to London began to report what many had feared but few expected. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, had been rushed to a Santa Barbara clinic after what was initially labeled as a severe stress-related collapse. A spokesperson used the word episode, but that word didn't seem big enough for what was unfolding. By midday, a shocking leak from within the hospital, one that would later be confirmed by two separate insiders, revealed a far graver reality. Prince Harry had been diagnosed with an advanced, rare autoimmune disease, one that had silently been attacking his organs for months, if not years. One that medical professionals believe was aggravated, if not directly triggered, by years of compounded psychological strain, chronic anxiety, and unresolved trauma. The announcement sent ripples through the British royal family, but those ripples quickly became tidal waves when it became known that Harry's prognosis was not optimistic. The term stage 4 was used, not in reference to cancer, but to the level of immune system collapse. This wasn't something that could simply be managed with a change in diet or medication. It was serious. And it forced the entire House of Windsor into crisis mode, both publicly and behind closed doors. What happened next, however, took everyone by surprise. It wasn't just the health crisis itself that dominated headlines. It was the reaction from those closest to Harry that raised the most eyebrows and questions. For the first time in years, King Charles, Prince William, and Meghan Markle were seen uniting, not around a public event or ceremonial duty, but in a private, emotional crisis that peeled back the gilded veneer of royal protocol and exposed something raw, human, and deeply fractured. Why was Prince William seen boarding a last-minute flight to California? Why did Meghan Markle, usually composed and tightly managed in public, appear utterly inconsolable as she exited the clinic where Harry was being treated? Why did King Charles, rarely one to emote in public, reportedly break down during a private briefing with his aides? More importantly, why are insiders now saying that all three, Charles, William, and Meghan, are preparing to say their final goodbyes? This story is about more than just a diagnosis. It's about a royal family pushed to its emotional breaking point. It's about decades of silence, of rivalry, of mistrust, all converging in one tragic moment. It's about a man who was born into privilege but burdened with pain. A man who once walked behind his mother's coffin in front of the entire world, and who now may be preparing for his own farewell. But before we dive into the depths of that emotional storm, it's important to understand just how we got here. Because the signs, as it turns out, were everywhere, hidden in plain sight. In the months leading up to this crisis, Prince Harry's public appearances had taken on a noticeably different tone. Once confident and relaxed in interviews, he began appearing withdrawn, tired, even disoriented at times. Some chalked it up to media pressure. Others said it was marital strain. But few guessed it was something far more insidious brewing beneath the surface, a silent war being waged within his own body. It's hard to forget his appearance at the Veterans Fundraiser in early spring. Clad in a sharp suit, Harry took the stage to give a speech honoring soldiers suffering from PTSD and physical injuries. But those in attendance noted something was off. His posture seemed strained. His voice trembled more than usual. And then, midway through the speech, he paused for a full 20 seconds, as though trying to catch his breath, or collect his thoughts, or perhaps both. That moment would later be replayed by countless online analysts and medical observers, many of whom now believe it may have been a subtle warning sign of the immune failure to come. Behind the scenes, the tension between Harry and Meghan had also reportedly grown more complex. While sources differ on the details, several agree that Meghan was increasingly concerned about Harry's physical and mental state, even as she continued to manage a relentless schedule of media appearances, Netflix projects, and business engagements. It's said that during a private dinner in May, Meghan confronted Harry about his health, begging him to see a specialist. He allegedly brushed it off. "I'm just tired," he said. "It'll pass." It didn't pass. By early June, those closest to the Sussexes noticed a dramatic shift. One staff member, speaking on condition of anonymity, described Harry as frustrated, restless, and unusually silent. He spent long hours walking alone on the estate grounds. He reportedly avoided calls from his brother and father. And then came the final straw, a fight between Harry and Meghan so intense that it prompted Meghan herself to call for medical help when Harry collapsed in the bathroom, struggling to breathe. The medical team that arrived didn't know the full picture at first. They treated it as a panic attack. But after hours of tests and a full body scan, the true nature of the threat emerged. The immune system markers were off the charts. Inflammatory indicators showed catastrophic internal stress. A battery of consultations later, and the diagnosis was clear: an aggressive, late-stage autoimmune condition rarely seen in someone so young and almost never at this level of progression without previous warning. Doctors believe the condition was made worse by chronic mental strain, including unresolved grief, sustained public scrutiny, and emotional suppression. In short, it was the emotional pressure cooker of being Prince Harry that may have triggered the breakdown of his own body. When news reached Buckingham Palace, an emergency family call was arranged. King Charles was reportedly devastated. He had hoped for reconciliation with Harry, but not under these circumstances. Prince William, though often publicly aloof in matters concerning his younger brother, immediately arranged for travel. And Meghan, already by Harry's side, found herself caught in a swirl of guilt, fear, and isolation. This isn't just another royal drama. This is a moment of reckoning for one of the most famous families on earth. Because when health becomes the ultimate equalizer, even crowns become irrelevant. Behind the palaces, the protocol, and the press statements lies a very real family, one haunted by silence, rivalry, and a love that's been tested beyond its limits. As we unfold this story, we'll take you inside the royal clinics, the secret meetings, and the final emotional letters that may become Harry's legacy. You'll hear what insiders overheard in the hospital hallway. You'll hear the words King Charles whispered through tears. And you'll witness how one man's collapse has shaken the very foundation of an institution built on image, not emotion. And perhaps, most importantly, we'll explore the one question that echoes louder than the rest. Is it too late to heal? It began like any ordinary morning, but in the world of Prince Harry, normalcy is always a fragile illusion, one often shattered by headlines, flashbulbs, or internal turmoil. That morning in Montecito, however, what shattered the calm wasn't the press or a scandal. It was something far more frightening, something silent, something no one could control. The sun had barely risen when the household staff first noticed something wasn't right. One of the royal aides, a woman who had worked with the Sussexes for over 3 years, reportedly found Prince Harry sitting alone on a bench in the garden, hunched forward, staring at the ground, breathing heavily. She called out to him, but he didn't respond. At first, she thought he was meditating. Harry had long practiced mindfulness as a coping tool. But as she stepped closer, she saw that his hands were shaking. His lips were pale. He was sweating despite the crisp California morning air. The aide panicked and rushed inside to inform Meghan, who was in the kitchen preparing tea. According to an insider familiar with the timeline of events, Meghan dropped the mug she was holding and sprinted outside, barefoot. What she saw there would change the next hours, and possibly the rest of their lives. Harry, by then, had collapsed onto the ground. His breaths were shallow, erratic. His eyes were unfocused. Meghan cradled his head in her lap and repeatedly called his name. "Harry, talk to me. Stay with me," she reportedly pleaded. But he couldn't answer. Within 5 minutes, she had phoned emergency services. The call, leaked later to the press, captured Meghan's trembling voice saying, "He can't breathe. He said his chest is burning. Please get here quickly. I don't know what's happening." The first responders arrived within 12 minutes. A discreet unit from a nearby private medical network, accustomed to high-profile clients, quietly entered the estate. They checked Harry's vitals and found his heart rate was abnormally high. His oxygen levels were low. His blood pressure was erratic. Paramedics suspected a severe panic attack at first, but something about his condition felt off. There was no external trigger, no obvious moment of emotional distress. It wasn't like the stress-induced collapses they'd seen before. This was more systemic. Meghan refused to leave his side as he was loaded into the private ambulance. Though Harry was semi-conscious, he reportedly mumbled several things, some of which were difficult to decipher. But one phrase was clear: as two separate medical team members would later confirm. Don't let her in. Not now. The staff didn't know who he meant at the time. Meghan thought it was a stress-induced rambling. But those words would later become one of the most controversial pieces of this unfolding drama. The ambulance didn't use sirens. Harry had previously made arrangements with private medical providers to avoid public spectacle. They drove to a clinic in Santa Barbara, one with world-class diagnostics and a reputation for. The hallway outside Prince Harry's hospital room was quiet, eerily quiet, according to one hospital worker. Staff spoke in hushed tones. Phones were muted. A royal aide sat slumped in a plastic chair, head in hands, visibly overwhelmed. Inside the room, two doctors reviewed the scan results in near silence, exchanging glances more than words. The gravity of what they were seeing didn't require dramatic declarations. The images spoke volumes. Organs inflamed, immunological indicators off the charts, and the worrying suggestion of chronic systemic deterioration. This wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't burnout. It wasn't a nervous breakdown or even a panic disorder. What had been initially suspected as acute psychological stress had revealed a far more complex, dangerous condition, one that had likely been progressing silently for years, masked by the chaos of public life and the high-functioning coping mechanisms of a man raised under scrutiny. The specialist, a world-renowned expert in autoimmune disorders, entered the room slowly. Her voice was calm, her demeanor controlled, but the message she carried would ignite panic across the Atlantic. Prince Harry was suffering from a rare form of autoimmune disease classified at stage 4, a classification that did not refer to cancer but rather to the severity of the immune system's malfunction. His body was, quite literally, attacking itself. Organs were inflamed. Blood markers showed immune hyperactivity. His body was overreacting to its own presence, misidentifying healthy tissue as a threat. The diagnosis was systemic autoimmune syndrome with progressive multi-organ involvement. A condition few had ever heard of, and fewer had survived when discovered this late. The disease had already compromised Harry's liver and kidneys. His nervous system was likely under siege as well, explaining the confusion, tremors, and emotional dysregulation he had experienced in recent weeks. The causes? There was no single trigger, but the doctor pointed to a series of compounding stressors: years of public abuse, childhood trauma, war experience, media hostility, family estrangement, and unrelenting scrutiny. In many ways, Harry's condition was the perfect metaphor for his life, a constant war waged within, an immune system reacting to stress as if it were poison. The medical team debated the next steps. High-dose immunosuppressants could be administered, but there was a risk of complications. Biologics might help reset the immune system, but the treatment would be long, painful, and uncertain. One consultant bluntly said, "We can try to slow it down, but reversing this? That's unlikely." The first person told was Meghan Markle. She was led into a private consultation room, accompanied by a nurse and Harry's personal physician, who had flown in hours earlier. Meghan listened silently, a tissue clenched in her hand. As the specialist explained the diagnosis, she didn't interrupt. She just sat there, rigid, frozen, absorbing each word like a blow. At the end, she reportedly whispered, "Does he know?" The doctor shook her head. "Not yet." Meghan stood, thanked them politely, and stepped outside. That's when the press captured the now viral photograph of her, sunglasses on, lips trembling, walking alone across the clinic's back courtyard, head slightly bowed. That image would be splashed across front pages from Los Angeles to London within hours. And though tabloids speculated she was devastated, the truth was far more complicated. According to a friend she later confided in, Meghan was gripped by a terrifying sense of helplessness and guilt. "She told me she didn't know if Harry had been keeping this from her, or if she had missed the signs," the friend recalled. She blamed herself for not doing more. But Meghan wasn't the only one devastated. Back in the UK, the gravity of the diagnosis reached King Charles and Prince William through a coded medical dispatch, routed via the royal physician's office. An encrypted message was delivered directly to Clarence House. King Charles was reportedly seated at a meeting with senior palace aides when the message arrived. After reading it, he dismissed the room. He then summoned Prince William. The two spoke for over an hour. William asked hard questions: what treatments were available, what the real odds were, and whether he would make it in time if he flew out immediately. The response from the medical liaison was non-committal. Harry was stable, but his condition could change quickly. Travel was advised as soon as possible. What broke William's composure wasn't the medical jargon. It was the final line of the report, added in handwriting by the attending physician. It read, "This is a man under immense emotional and psychological pressure. His body is collapsing under a burden it was never meant to carry." For William, that line cut deep. It forced him to confront questions he had spent years avoiding. What role had the royal family played in Harry's deterioration? Could more have been done? Had they lost him years before the headlines made it official? There was also the matter of the public. The palace was receiving hundreds of inquiries from reporters. Social media was alive with speculation. Hashtags like #HarryHealthCrisis and #SaveThePrince were trending globally. The Royal Communications Office was under siege, caught between the need to control the narrative and the risk of being accused of hiding the truth. An emergency strategy session was held in the palace media room. Some advisors suggested releasing a carefully worded statement confirming that Harry was undergoing treatment for a non-life-threatening condition. Others urged transparency, arguing that hiding the truth would only fuel conspiracy theories. In the end, no statement was released that day. The palace would remain silent for now. But inside its stone walls, panic had set in. Meanwhile, back in California, the decision had been made to wake Harry and gently inform him of his condition. The doctors agreed that withholding the truth would only add to his psychological burden. Meghan was present, sitting beside his bed as he slowly opened his eyes. A nurse described the moment as devastating. Harry looked up at Meghan, confused, groggy. He asked where he was. She explained, stroking his hand, her voice steady but breaking at the edges. Then came the doctors. They explained the scans, the immune system, the treatments. Harry said nothing for a full minute. Then, in a barely audible voice, he asked, "Is it permanent?" The lead physician hesitated. "We can manage it, but it's serious." Harry closed his eyes again, and then he reportedly said something that no one in the room expected. "Please don't call them yet. I need a minute." Them, presumably referred to his family. He had already guessed that the palace would have been notified, but emotionally, he wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Not with Charles. Not with William. Especially not with the rest of the world. But the world was already watching. In the hours that followed, international media broke the story in waves. The diagnosis hadn't been confirmed publicly, but several high-level leaks gave journalists enough to run with it. Prince Harry hospitalized after health crisis became the top headline on news sites in over 20 countries. Networks canceled scheduled programming to cover the unfolding drama. Analysts speculated on the nature of his condition, his chances of recovery, and the effect this would have on the royal family's future. Medical experts were called in to explain what could cause such an autoimmune collapse in someone Harry's age. One renowned immunologist told the BBC, "We know that unresolved trauma, especially in individuals with high levels of chronic stress, can lead to the immune system malfunctioning. In some cases, the body literally turns on itself." This diagnosis wasn't just about health. It was about a system, both medical and royal, that had failed to intervene soon enough. And perhaps more deeply, it was about a human being who had been born into a machine too powerful to escape. A machine that demands silence, endurance, and perfection, even as it eats its own from the inside. Prince Harry had been fighting a war most couldn't see. Now, for the first time, the battlefield had become visible. This wasn't the kind of story the palace knew how to manage. This wasn't scandal, or a rift, or a PR misstep. This was mortality, vulnerability, the fragility of a man once considered invincible because of his titles, his celebrity, or his resilience. And now, as the diagnosis broke the silence the royal family had maintained for so long, a new question was beginning to rise, one that couldn't be dodged with press statements or photo ops. What happens when royalty breaks? The tall windows of Clarence House, overlooking the gardens of St. James's Park, rarely betray what goes on inside. For decades, it has been the epicenter of whispered decisions and hidden royal strategies. But on this particular day, the air inside was uncharacteristically heavy, charged not with political calculation or ceremonial scheduling, but with something far more human, dread. It was the late afternoon when King Charles summoned Prince William to join him in the private study. The call was short. "I need you here." Immediately, there was no need to explain further. By that point, William had already read the preliminary health reports concerning Prince Harry. The words "stage 4 autoimmune condition" were still echoing in his mind, and though he maintained a stoic face in public, Behind the palace gates, he was already coming undone. When William arrived, his stride was purposeful, but his eyes betrayed the anxiety beneath. A valet opened the door to the king's study, then quietly closed it behind him. For a moment, father and son stood in silence. Then Charles rose from behind his desk, clutching a folder. He handed it to William without a word. Inside were the full medical briefings from Harry's doctors in California. Lab results, scans, professional analysis from the clinic's leading specialists. William flipped through them, line by line, his eyes narrowing. He paused when he saw a specific passage, a direct quote from a consultant immunologist. It read, "Subject's physical collapse appears to correlate directly with long-term psychological stress, compounded by public scrutiny, familial estrangement, and chronic sleep disruption." William put the folder down. "So this is our fault," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement loaded with decades of history. Charles didn't answer at first. He turned to the window, watching a bird land on the stone balustrade. "We all made choices," he finally said. "Some were necessary. Some were, perhaps, unkind." William sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he murmured. Not to him. The room was silent for several beats. Then Charles added, almost reluctantly, "I keep thinking about that walk behind Diana's coffin. He was 12, and yet we made him do it. Cameras. People crying. Applause. For what? A performance? Closure." "He didn't get closure," William replied. "None of us did." The conversation then shifted. They discussed the timeline. The doctor's recommendation to begin treatment immediately. The prognosis if the condition was left unchecked. The potential impact of international travel on Harry's weakened immune system. All of it factual, all of it detached. Until William suddenly asked, "Does he want to see us?" That question hung in the air like smoke. Because the truth was, neither of them knew. Harry had not requested their presence. He hadn't asked to speak to them. And while Meghan had kept them loosely informed through intermediaries, there had been no direct contact. No phone call. No message. Not even a word through royal aides. Charles responded quietly, "Even if he doesn't, we go." There were logistical considerations. Travel arrangements needed to be discreet. The media couldn't be tipped off. The palace was still deliberating over what public stance to take. A diplomatic channel had already reached out to the United States Embassy to ensure there would be no visa complications, no red tape that could delay their journey. But amid all the planning, one question pulsed beneath every decision. How had it come to this? How had two brothers, once inseparable in their shared grief and laughter, become strangers divided by oceans and silence? How had a father allowed one son to feel so unsupported that he withdrew entirely from the family fold? For William, the memories of their boyhood rushed back uninvited. Playing in the gardens of Balmoral. Whispering jokes during boring state dinners. Climbing trees together when the cameras weren't looking. He remembered the night Harry snuck into his room crying because a tabloid had run a cruel story about him. He remembered promising to always look out for him. And now, he was facing the very real possibility that he might not get the chance to fulfill that promise. After an hour, their conversation shifted again, this time toward how to handle the public. Charles was cautious. "If we speak too soon, it becomes a media circus. But if we say nothing, they'll accuse us of indifference." William offered an alternative. "Let's wait until we've seen him. Then we can speak with clarity. With truth." Charles agreed. But he added, "No statements. No press briefings. We go as a father and a brother, not as the crown." As they finalized their travel plans, a trusted advisor entered the room with a phone in hand. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "Meghan has requested to speak with you privately." Charles hesitated. It had been nearly a year since they last spoke directly. The last conversation had not ended well. But something in the advisor's tone urged him to take the call. He stepped into a smaller room adjacent to the study and picked up the line. "Hello," he said cautiously. There was silence at first. Then a trembling voice replied, "It's me. Meghan." "I didn't know who else to call," she said. Her voice was raw, cracked from crying. She didn't apologize. She didn't make accusations. She simply described the scene. Harry was weak, sleeping most of the time. He was undergoing treatment, but the doctors were blunt. The disease was advanced. They had stabilized him, but no one could promise how long it would remain that way. "I don't know what to do," she said. "I don't know what he needs." Charles softened. For all their public feuds and private resentments, Meghan's grief was real. He could hear it. She loved Harry. That much was clear. "We'll come," Charles said. "William and I. We'll come to him." There was a pause, then a relieved exhale. "Thank you," she whispered. As Charles hung up, he lingered by the door for a moment before returning to the study. William looked up. "Was that?" "Yes," Charles replied. "She's afraid. She's alone in this." William nodded slowly. "Not anymore." The preparations accelerated. Travel manifests were signed. The royal family's private jet, usually used for official state travel, was prepped under a veil of secrecy. The destination was filed under a coded itinerary to avoid press leaks. Only a handful of trusted staff were informed. But even as logistics were set in motion, there was a quiet anxiety neither man voiced aloud. What if they arrived too late? What if Harry, already emotionally withdrawn, already physically fragile, rejected their presence? What if this journey ended not in reconciliation, but in regret? And yet, they boarded the plane, not because of duty, not because of image, but because somewhere, buried beneath the anger and the press statements, they still loved him. As the engines roared to life and the plane began its ascent into the dusk-stained sky, King Charles looked out the window and murmured to himself, "Let this not be the end." Across the ocean, in a hospital room softly lit by a bedside lamp, Prince Harry stirred in his sleep. Meghan sat beside him, holding his hand, watching the monitors with wide, sleepless eyes. She didn't know they were already on their way. But something in Harry's face softened as he slept, as though on some unconscious level, he could sense the approaching footsteps of a father and brother, not as royalty, but as family finally willing to step into the storm. The world has seen Meghan Markle in many forms. Poised actress, polished duchess, powerful advocate, and tireless businesswoman. She's been scrutinized, lionized, and vilified in equal measure. But what the public rarely sees is what she looks like when the cameras are off, when the makeup is gone, and when the strength that usually defines her is crumbling at the edges. Inside that Santa Barbara clinic, Meghan was not the public figure. She was not the Duchess. She was simply a wife watching her husband break and feeling powerless to stop it. It started as shock. When the diagnosis was first delivered, Meghan listened with a frozen expression, absorbing the words like glass cutting through silence. She asked all the right questions. She took notes. She nodded as though trying to keep control. But the moment she was alone, completely alone, something in her unraveled. According to a senior nurse who witnessed it, Meghan walked into the hospital restroom, locked the door, and cried until her voice was hoarse. She didn't come out for nearly 20 minutes. When she did, the composed facade had vanished. Her face was streaked with tears. Her hands trembled. She declined to speak with anyone except Harry's attending physician. For a woman who had managed one of the most closely watched transitions into royal life with careful control, this kind of emotional breakdown was uncharacteristic. But it was real. In those hours, Meghan began to spiral. Not in a dramatic, outwardly reckless way, but internally, through a storm of guilt, rage, helplessness, and blame. One hospital staff member recounted that Meghan was overheard whispering to herself in the waiting room, "I should have seen this. I should have done something sooner." That whisper was the first hint of a deep inner conflict. Meghan, more than anyone, had seen Harry's decline from up close. She had lived with him through the nights when he'd wake drenched in sweat from old nightmares. She'd heard his frustration when tabloids tore apart their parenting. She'd seen him retreat into silence after family spats or media attacks. She knew his armor. And now, that armor was shattered, and so was the man inside it. But the guilt was only one layer. Beneath that sat anger, raw, blistering, and unresolved. According to two close friends who later spoke with media under anonymity, Meghan felt a deep sense of betrayal. Not just from the institution of the monarchy, but from the unrelenting forces that had ground Harry down. The British tabloids, the online harassment, the public apathy to his suffering, and even the royal family's cold detachment. And in the quiet halls of that clinic, she finally let it all surface. One hospital administrator, who was present during a phone call Meghan made to a longtime confidant, described the conversation as heart-wrenching. She reportedly said, "They watched him fall apart and did nothing. Nothing. They acted like he was exaggerating. Like he was just being dramatic." Her voice, normally measured and composed, reportedly rose as she added, "They have no idea what he's been through. What we've both been through. They just want to control the narrative." Those words carried more than pain. They carried years of pent-up fury. This wasn't just about Harry's illness. This was about every slight, every cold shoulder, every dismissive comment, every headline that twisted Harry's humanity into mockery or doubt. In Meghan's view, the diagnosis wasn't just a medical reality. It was the physical embodiment of everything the world had refused to acknowledge, that Harry had been hurting all along. The days leading up to his collapse had been rough, by all accounts. Tensions in the household were high. One staff member claimed Meghan and Harry had argued over an upcoming joint interview. Meghan wanted to cancel. Harry insisted on doing it. He reportedly said, "If I keep running from everything, what's the point of speaking at all?" That disagreement was never resolved. Within 48 hours, he was in a hospital bed. Meghan hadn't slept properly since. She was seen pacing the hospital corridors at 3 a.m., sometimes stopping to sit on the floor and rest her head against the wall. Staff members offered her water, but she rarely drank. She refused food. Aides tried to bring her changes of clothes, but she stayed in the same outfit for nearly 2 days. One nurse eventually convinced her to rest in a private family suite. She agreed, reluctantly, and lay on the couch for a few hours, still fully dressed. Her breakdown wasn't just emotional. It was physical. Her body reacted to the stress. Reports from those near her said she began experiencing migraines, nausea, and periods of trembling. Medical staff had to check her vitals on multiple occasions. And through it all, she refused to leave Harry's side for more than a few moments. Yet even in her most vulnerable state, Meghan's mind was still working. She was already preparing for what might come next. What would happen if Harry didn't recover? What kind of narrative would form in the press? What kind of statements would the palace make? Would the world paint her as the woman who failed to save him, or as the outsider who brought too much fire into the royal institution? She kept saying, "They'll blame me," one insider revealed. "If he dies, they'll say I killed him. They'll say I pushed him too far." That fear wasn't unfounded. In the hours after news of Harry's condition broke, online commentary became vicious. Trolls speculated wildly, some accusing Meghan of manipulating the situation for sympathy, others going as far as suggesting she had orchestrated it. One especially cruel tweet read, "Maybe now people will see Meghan for what she really is, a poison to everything she touches." Such attacks weren't new, but in that moment, they hit differently. Meghan wasn't just the subject of public scrutiny, she was a woman on the brink, watching her husband fade, and still expected to carry herself like a duchess. It all reached a tipping point when Meghan was asked to sign off on a joint statement that had been drafted by the couple's PR team in collaboration with Kensington Palace. The statement was meant to offer a united front, saying the family was hopeful, united, and supporting Harry. But Meghan refused. "I'm not lying to make them comfortable," she reportedly said. "We're not united. We haven't spoken in months. And I'm not pretending everything is fine when it's not." The PR team scrambled. The palace grew uneasy. And Meghan, now fully entrenched in her grief, lashed out. Later that evening, in a quiet moment with a close friend who had flown in to support her, Meghan reportedly broke down once again. She looked at Harry, hooked to machines, breathing steadily but shallowly, and whispered, "I don't even know if he wants me here." The friend tried to reassure her, reminding her of Harry's love, his commitment, their history. But Meghan's fears ran deeper. She had overheard the staff repeating Harry's fragmented words during the ambulance ride. "Don't let her in." And though logic told her he had been disoriented, part of her couldn't shake the feeling that those words had meaning. "Maybe he's angry," she said quietly. "Maybe he blames me too." It was a sentiment she never would have admitted publicly. But in that clinic, among the steady beeps and clinical silence, Meghan wasn't the woman the world had defined her to be. She was a wife unraveling, unable to protect the one person she loved most. As the hours passed, and Harry drifted in and out of consciousness, Meghan sat by his side and held his hand. She whispered memories. She reminded him of their first date, their secret trip to Botswana, the moment he met Archie for the first time. She wept when he didn't respond. She smiled when his fingers twitched slightly in hers. And in the deepest parts of her breakdown, something else began to take root: resolve. She knew she couldn't undo the past. She couldn't erase the decisions that had driven a wedge between them and the royals. She couldn't heal Harry's body, but she could fight. For him. For their children. For what remained of their life. By morning, her posture had changed. The tears still came, but less frequently. The trembling lessened. She accepted food, drank tea, and finally agreed to let her staff handle media inquiries. When told that King Charles and Prince William were en route, she simply nodded. She didn't flinch, the nurse said. She just said, "Good. It's time." Meghan Markle had broken down, but she hadn't shattered. She bent. She cried. She collapsed. But she was still standing. And now, as the family prepared to converge on a hospital room thousands of miles from Buckingham Palace, Meghan would be forced to face not just the ghosts of the institution, but the truth of what her husband had endured and what it would take to bring him back. The present had already become a battlefield. Prince Harry's diagnosis had ripped open wounds within the royal family and brought its most carefully guarded emotional fissures into public view. But as the days in the hospital dragged on, something else began to emerge, something deeper than grief or blame. Buried memories, long-avoided conversations, and unspoken truths that had been silenced for decades began to rise to the surface. The illness had shaken everyone, but now it was waking ghosts. For many watching from the outside, Harry's collapse was a tragedy in the present tense. But for those closest to him, it forced a confrontation with the past, especially his childhood, especially Diana. It was Meghan who first raised the subject during one of her quiet moments in the family room adjacent to the hospital suite. Sitting with Harry's private therapist, someone who had been with him since the early days of their move to California, she reportedly said, "He never really got over her death. Not properly. Not completely." The therapist nodded. He never had the chance to. It wasn't just the loss, it was how they forced him to handle it. That statement struck a nerve. Because no matter how modern the royal family attempted to appear, its emotional traditions remained steeped in a long, cold legacy of endurance over vulnerability. Prince Harry, at 12 years old, was expected to walk behind his mother's casket in front of millions of people, maintaining composure, dignity, silence. No child should have to do that. Yet he did. And no one ever really asked him if he was okay. That single moment, etched into the global consciousness, was also etched into Harry's psyche. Several insiders have since confirmed that Harry had recurring nightmares of that walk well into adulthood. In one session, he reportedly admitted that he could still hear the sound of the horse's hooves and the murmur of the crowd, and that he sometimes woke up hearing the sound of his own shoes on pavement. A trauma like that doesn't just fade. It lingers in the bones. His time in the military had masked some of that pain. The structure, the purpose, the camaraderie. These gave him the illusion of control. But even in the military, Harry found himself confronting death more directly than ever before. According to one former Army colleague, he was brave, no doubt about it. But there were times you could see something flicker in him, like he was always fighting something else, something invisible. That invisible weight carried through his 20s and early 30s. And when Meghan entered his life, it was like a floodgate opened. She encouraged therapy. She asked hard questions. She pushed him to confront memories he tried to bury. In their early months together, Harry reportedly broke down during a private retreat in Africa, telling her, "I don't know how to breathe when it's quiet. It's like I'm always waiting for something to explode." But even as Meghan encouraged healing, the royal machine resisted it. According to several insiders, there were moments when Harry tried to bring up the emotional toll of royal life to his father and brother, and was met with quiet nods, vague reassurances, or awkward deflections. One particularly heartbreaking account comes from a Christmas gathering 2 years before the Sussexes officially stepped back. Harry had attempted to talk to William about seeing a trauma specialist, not just for himself, but for the family. William reportedly listened, then responded, "We all have a role to play. Talking about it won't change what we're expected to do." The conversation ended there. Now, in the wake of his collapse, that decision felt like a pivot point. One insider put it bluntly, they could have helped him back then. But they chose silence over discomfort. And it wasn't just emotional pain that had gone unspoken. Other secrets began to surface too. Some whispered, others hinted at in interviews over the years, never fully confirmed. Among them, the long-standing rumors surrounding Harry's paternity. While such claims were always dismissed publicly, privately they gnawed at Harry for years. It wasn't about whether they were true. It was about the silence around them, the refusal to address them, the isolation they created. In his own words, documented in confidential conversations, Harry once said, "I don't care what the truth is. I just hate that no one's ever been honest about it. They let the world speculate, and they never said anything. They left me to carry it." This silence became a pattern. Whether it was mental health, the relentless media, or his struggles with anger and identity, Harry found himself alone. And over time, he began to internalize that loneliness. He turned to self-medication, as he later admitted. He acted out. He withdrew. The palace framed it as youthful rebellion, but now, with his diagnosis laid bare, it looked less like rebellion and more like symptoms. The illness itself, this autoimmune breakdown, was perhaps the final manifestation of that long, slow internal war. The body keeping score, the nervous system shouting what the lips never could. For Meghan, that realization was devastating. In one recorded session with the therapist, she reportedly said, "It wasn't just stress that caused this. It was abandonment. Generational abandonment. It's like he's been bleeding invisibly for years." And then came the file. Shortly after King Charles and Prince William landed in California and were escorted to a private location for briefing, an envelope was handed to them. It had been compiled by a royal historian and medical consultant, a timeline of every key moment in Harry's life that might have contributed to his health crisis. It included early interviews with Diana where she expressed concern over the pressure on her sons. It included letters she wrote to confidants about Harry's sensitivity. It included notes from school reports citing anxiety. It even included a draft letter she had once written but never sent to Charles, begging for more emotional support for their boys. As Charles read the file, his face reportedly turned ashen. William, reading over his shoulder, asked, "Where was all of this when we needed it?" The historian answered quietly, "Buried." Like everything else, it became clear that Harry's collapse wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was the climax of a long-forgotten warning, one that had echoed in the background for years but was drowned out by duty, tradition, and silence. Now, with his body failing, those old secrets were no longer just historical, they were immediate, alive, demanding to be acknowledged. That same day, Meghan was visited by one of Harry's old friends from the army. He brought with him a journal Harry had kept during a deployment. Inside were scribbled notes, half-formed thoughts, and one entry that simply read, "If I go, I hope they finally look at the why, not just the how." That line haunted her, because that's what this moment had become. A reckoning. A demand to stop glossing over the damage. To stop pretending that royal life was only pageantry and privilege. It had costs. Deep, personal costs. And Harry had paid more than most. The days ahead would require more than medical intervention. They would require truth. Not just in public statements, but within the family itself. Conversations that had been avoided for years could no longer wait. Letters unsent. Apologies withheld. Questions unasked. They all hung in the air like ghosts in the corridors of Windsor, now chasing them across oceans to a hospital room in California. For King Charles, that reckoning was personal. For William, it was painful. For Meghan, it was necessary. But for Harry, if he survived, it might be the beginning of something resembling peace. Because now, finally, they weren't just talking about his health. They were talking about everything that came before it. The initial murmur began on social media, just a few scattered posts from anonymous users claiming something was going on with Prince Harry. A blurry photo of an ambulance outside the Montecito estate. A supposed hospital employee tweeting that a high-profile patient had been rushed into emergency care under strict confidentiality. At first, it didn't seem credible. Prince Harry was often the subject of rumors, most of them exaggerated or flat-out false. But by mid-morning, the whispers had become a storm. News outlets picked up the scent quickly. TMZ broke the first major headline. Prince Harry rushed to Santa Barbara Clinic after health scare. No official statement followed, but that didn't stop speculation. Within minutes, every major network in the US and UK had gone into overdrive. CNN, BBC, Sky News, ITV, NBC. They all interrupted scheduled programming to report the breaking news. Royal correspondents were pulled into studios with nothing but fragments of information and years of accumulated context. And even that was enough to create chaos. Twitter, now rebranded but still dominant in breaking news cycles, lit up. The hashtag #PrayForHarry began trending globally, quickly followed by #RoyalCrisis, #HarryHealthEmergency, and later, the more ominous #WhereIsHarry. People wanted answers. But the silence from the palace and the Sussex camp only deepened the mystery. Speculation ran wild. Was it a heart attack? A relapse into mental health crisis? A suicide attempt? Or something worse? The media, for all its speculation, had learned not to underestimate the seriousness of royal health scares. The public had seen too many examples of tragedy covered in secrecy, Princess Diana's death chief among them. The historical precedent made this silence feel all the more sinister. As the hours passed and Harry remained unseen, journalists stationed themselves outside every major medical center in Southern California. Helicopters hovered. Camera crews waited. Anonymous tips flooded editorial inboxes. Some claimed Harry had been put into a medically induced coma. Others said Meghan had been escorted out of the clinic in tears. None of these stories could be confirmed, but the lack of clarity gave them room to spread. The hospital was forced to issue a statement denying that any celebrity patient information had been leaked. Still, that didn't stop tabloids from running full-length pieces with speculative headlines like Harry's Final Days and The Crisis Meghan Couldn't Prevent. Even respected papers like The Guardian and The Times of London ran front-page stories based on sources close to the family, carefully crafted to skirt libel while still drawing attention. What made this moment even more chaotic was the sudden reappearance of figures who had once surrounded the Sussex narrative. Royal biographers emerged from obscurity to offer commentary. Former palace insiders gave exclusive interviews, dissecting every bit of body language from the few images that had leaked. One former press secretary said, "The fact that the palace isn't issuing a statement means this is extremely serious. They only go quiet when something is genuinely catastrophic." The general public, however, didn't just consume the story, they became part of it. Vigils sprang up outside Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and Windsor Castle. In California, clusters of royal supporters gathered outside the clinic, holding signs that read, "Stay strong, Harry," and "Monarchy needs heart, not titles." Flowers were left by the clinic's back entrance, and candles were lit in small circles as people wept for a man they felt had been misunderstood, mistreated, and now, perhaps, mortally wounded. The generational divide in reactions was also striking. Older royalists, particularly in the UK, expressed sadness but often laced with commentary on how Harry had brought much of this on himself. Some saw his retreat from royal life, the Netflix documentaries, the memoirs, and the Oprah interview as a public unraveling, a result of too much openness, too much Hollywood, not enough discretion. Younger audiences, especially across the US, Canada, and Australia, saw something else. They saw a man who had spoken out about mental health, who had tried to heal generational trauma, who had dared to walk away from an institution that never protected him. For them, Harry was not a scandal. He was a symbol of defiance and now of sacrifice. Social media campaigns gained momentum. Influencers and mental health advocates began posting reels and threads titled, "This is what stress does to the body," linking Harry's condition to a larger conversation about burnout, trauma, and the crushing effects of constant public scrutiny. Some videos showed side-by-side images of Harry from 5 years ago and today, highlighting the noticeable aging, the deeper lines in his face, the tiredness in his eyes. These weren't just vanity comparisons. They were presented as proof of emotional erosion. Celebrities joined in too. Serena Williams tweeted a simple, "Praying for Harry." Oprah posted an Instagram story with a photo of her and Harry from their groundbreaking interview, captioned, "Some stories are too heavy for one soul to carry. Keep them in your heart today." Tyler Perry, who had once housed Harry and Meghan during their transition out of the royal family, shared a longer post. "Behind every headline is a human being, and sometimes the strongest ones break hardest." But not all responses were kind. Royal traditionalists accused the Sussex camp of exaggerating Harry's condition for sympathy. Pundits like Piers Morgan questioned the timing, suggesting that the story was being weaponized to rebuild the Sussex brand. Some newspapers ran op-eds arguing that Harry's illness was sad, but that it didn't erase the damage he had done to the monarchy. "Tragedy does not equal absolution," read one controversial line in the Telegraph. The palace remained mostly silent through this wave. But internally, aides were panicking. Leaks were becoming uncontrollable. Misinformation was flooding the digital space. And now, reporters were camping outside King Charles's estate, demanding comment. The palace's press team held a late-night meeting to decide on next steps. Some wanted to release a joint statement with Meghan to show unity. Others warned that would only deepen the perception of crisis. In the end, they issued a one-sentence release. "The royal family is aware of the situation concerning the Duke of Sussex and is receiving regular updates." It wasn't enough. If anything, it made things worse. Speculation increased. An entire sub-economy of content creators launched live streams analyzing everything from the font used in the statement to the fact that the Queen consort had not been seen publicly for 2 days. Hashtags morphed into movements. Hashtag Justice for Harry began trending alongside hashtag The Spare Was Broken, referencing Harry's position as the spare heir and the perceived neglect that came with it. The chaos also sparked protest. Outside the Daily Mail headquarters, a group of activists staged a sit-in, holding signs reading "You did this," and "The press killed Diana, will they kill Harry too?" Similar protests erupted outside other media buildings in London and New York. In Parliament, a handful of progressive MPs called for an investigation into press harassment of royals, particularly those who had stepped back from official duties. One MP gave an impassioned speech. "If Prince Harry's condition is in any way linked to the unrelenting psychological attacks he has endured, we must reckon with the role we've all played." Meanwhile, news cameras remained stationed outside the hospital, where every vehicle, every shadow behind the tinted windows was scrutinized. Meghan's reappearance, walking slowly, holding a coffee cup, flanked by security, sparked another round of headlines. Her expression was unreadable. Some called her cold. Others called her stoic. In truth, she was exhausted beyond recognition. By the end of the week, international leaders began weighing in. The Canadian Prime Minister sent well wishes. The President of Ireland made a public statement of sympathy. Even the White House press secretary was asked about Harry's condition during a briefing, to which she responded, "We are monitoring the situation and offer our thoughts to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex." And still, no direct word from Harry himself. His silence became its own message. It deepened the gravity of what was happening. For years, Harry had spoken, on podcasts, in interviews, in books. Now, with the world listening harder than ever, he was quiet. And that quiet, more than any official report, signaled just how serious things were. Amid the media frenzy, one voice broke through with piercing clarity, an old friend of Harry's from his time in the army. Speaking anonymously, he gave a short interview to a BBC journalist. He never wanted to be famous. That was never the goal. He just wanted to be good. A good soldier. A good husband. A good father. That's all. And somehow, he got buried under everything else. And now, this is what's left. Those words were replayed on television, radio, YouTube, and TikTok. They became a rallying cry, quoted in articles, shared in group chats, printed on t-shirts. He just wanted to be good. The phrase captured what many had suspected but had never said aloud. Prince Harry hadn't just collapsed physically. He had collapsed under a weight none of us had truly understood until now. Inside the heavily guarded walls of Buckingham Palace, there was no mistaking the mood. It wasn't panic, at least not outwardly. Royals are trained to maintain composure, to move with a calmness so practiced it borders on inhuman. But beneath the polished surface, there was something far more dangerous than panic stirring, the awareness that control was slipping, not just over public perception, but over the very narrative that had shielded the monarchy for centuries. The health emergency of Prince Harry had exposed a crack in the foundation that no amount of PR spin could patch overnight. For decades, the palace had operated like a fortress, wielding silence and selective visibility as its primary tools. But the world had changed. News moved faster. Secrets leaked quicker. Public empathy swelled in real time. And the royal family's handling of crises, once honed in the slow churn of newspapers and cable news, was suddenly being tested in the brutal instant of viral media. By the second day of Harry's hospitalization, the royal communications team had entered crisis mode. Inside a restricted wing of the palace, the most senior press advisors met with senior courtiers and legal counsel to strategize. The question on the table wasn't just what to say, but how to contain a narrative that had already spread far beyond their reach. One aide, present at the meeting, reportedly opened with the blunt observation, "This is not about illness anymore. This is about perception. The people believe we broke him, and they are demanding accountability." A long silence followed. The press secretary, who had managed years of royal engagements and international tours, presented a summary of trending public opinion. According to internal analytics, support for Prince Harry had surged to its highest level since his wedding in 2018. Sympathy posts were outnumbering critical ones nearly 10-1. More disturbingly, sentiment analysis revealed that Prince William and King Charles were being painted as emotionally distant, even negligent. The public wasn't just rallying around Harry. They were turning against the palace. The first instinct was to counter. Some staff suggested releasing unseen photos of Charles and Harry in private moments, images that painted the king as a caring father. Others proposed a coordinated media push highlighting Harry's positive experiences growing up royal, with interviews from former nannies, tutors, and family friends. The idea was to shift the tone from fracture to fondness, to remind people that Harry was raised in love, not neglect. But there was a problem. None of it felt authentic. Leaked reports about Harry's statements in therapy, including allegations of emotional abandonment and silence in the face of grief, had already dominated the public sphere, and any attempt to romanticize the past risked being interpreted as whitewashing. Worse, it might provoke Meghan to respond. The palace had learned, painfully, that Meghan Markle was no longer playing the same game. She would speak her truth, press optics be damned. The second idea floated was to release a brief joint statement from King Charles and Prince William expressing concern, hope, and affection for Harry, but without specifics. Something diplomatic, neutral, safe, but even that posed risks. A statement without emotional weight could come off as hollow. And anything too emotional could be weaponized by critics who'd accuse the palace of using tragedy to rehabilitate its image. Amid the swirl of suggestions, one senior courtier asked the question that had been quietly circling the room. What if Harry doesn't make it? That possibility, spoken aloud, sent a chill through the chamber. For all the medical updates and reassurances from Meghan's end, no one could deny that the situation remained fragile. And if the unthinkable happened, if the world's most scrutinized second son died amid a storm of unresolved conflict, it would become more than a PR nightmare. It would be a cultural reckoning. That night, King Charles convened a smaller, more intimate gathering at Clarence House. In attendance were his private secretary, legal counsel, and a longtime spiritual advisor. The meeting was quieter, less clinical. Here, they spoke not of optics, but of moral responsibility. Charles, visibly aged in just a few days, reportedly confessed that he didn't know how to speak to his son anymore. He hears my voice and assumes I'm here to control him, the king reportedly said. I don't know how to reach him without sounding like the crown. The spiritual advisor offered a gentle suggestion. Then perhaps you should speak as a father, not a monarch, not a symbol, just a man who loves his son. Charles didn't respond immediately, but the words stayed with him. Meanwhile, in Kensington Palace, William was undergoing his own internal crisis. Reports from those closest to him say that he was deeply shaken by the public's perception of his role in Harry's decline. As second in line to the throne, William had always walked the tightrope of duty and family with precision, but the current moment forced him to reevaluate. Had he been too cold? Too distant? Too committed to the institution to see his brother slipping away? One aide overheard William muttering late at night, I thought we had more time. With Harry sedated and still under constant observation, the palace decided to delay any public statement for another 24 hours. In the interim, they reached out quietly to Meghan's team with a request. Would she be open to a private conversation with Charles and William before any statement was released? The goal, they explained, was not coordination, but humanity. They wanted to ensure that Harry's condition was the focus, not the feud. To everyone's surprise, Meghan agreed. The virtual call was scheduled for the next morning. Meghan, visibly exhausted, appeared from a quiet room within the hospital. Charles and William were seated together in a study, both dressed plainly, devoid of formal attire. The conversation was brief but intense. Charles spoke first. He said that he wanted to see Harry not as a king, but as a father, that he hoped to say what should have been said years ago. Meghan listened, said little, but nodded. Then William, his voice tense, added, I didn't come to make peace. I came to say I miss him. I don't know how we got here, but I want to find a way back. Meghan looked into the camera, her expression unreadable. After a pause, she said, Then be here when he wakes up. The call ended. Plans were made. And for the first time in days, the palace felt a glimmer of something it had almost forgotten, hope. But the press machine waited for no one. Outside, the media continued its march. Tabloids released headlines each hour. Talk shows aired speculative segments. Some claimed Harry had already regained consciousness and was refusing visitors. Others said Meghan had asked for total isolation. None of it was confirmed. All of it added fuel to the storm. To stem the tide, the palace issued its most significant release yet, a full statement from King Charles. It was just over one page. No embellishment, no royal titles, just a message from a father. It read, in part, As a family, we are walking through a moment of immense pain. My son is gravely ill, and the only priority at this time is his recovery. Much has been said, written, and speculated. But I ask, for his sake, for compassion to prevail, for silence to replace speculation, and for love to speak louder than legacy. The public reaction was mixed. Some praised the king for finally showing emotion. Others said it was too little, too late. But for the palace, the statement marked a turning point. It wasn't about perfect optics. It was about vulnerability. And that, perhaps, was the only real strategy left. Internally, the damage control wasn't over. The communications team continued to monitor online sentiment, preparing for every scenario, positive or tragic. Legal teams reviewed every article for defamation. A crisis therapist was brought in to support royal staff under immense pressure. And all engagements for Charles and William were canceled indefinitely. The walls of the monarchy, once impenetrable, had cracked. But through those cracks, something human had begun to leak out. Grief, regret, love, and the desperate hope that it wasn't too late. Prince Harry's illness had done what no press campaign ever could. It made the monarchy bleed in public. Just moments ago, a royal insider confirmed what the palace has tried to keep quiet. Prince Harry has been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive stage for autoimmune disease, silently attacking his organs for months. Sources say it was triggered by years of unrelenting trauma, public humiliation, and emotional isolation. King Charles, Prince William, and Meghan Markle have all been seen privately saying their goodbyes. Meghan is reportedly inconsolable, blaming the palace for what she calls the slow destruction of the man she married. But that's only the beginning. What was whispered in that hospital room? Why did Harry plead not to let Meghan in at first? And how is this devastating moment forcing the royal family to finally confront secrets buried for decades?